Hi everyone, my name is Winnie,
My name is Vivien.
and you're watching ANAH X Gallery Series 3rd episode hosted by the two of us. Today, we are very excited to have John Corbett and Jim Dempsey, the founders of Corbett and Dempsey Gallery, to share their artwork collection and gallery practices with us. Corbett and Dempsey is a private gallery that presents a variety of Chicago-based and international artists who have connections with the cultural landscape of Chicago. It also runs a record label featuring a mixture of jazz, rock, and experimental sound projects.
Well, maybe I'll start introducing myself. I'm John Corbett, and um, Jim and I founded the gallery in 2004. We were already working together a little bit before that, and knew about each other here in the city for some time, maybe a decade before that, both as cultural producers. My background is largely coming out of improvised music and experimental music. That's a big part of what I did early on when I was a graduate student. And when I was an undergrad, I was organizing concerts and working on writing about music. And I also write about music now. And we continue to do a lot of things with music. Jim and I both have a pretty deep interest in experimental music and music of all different kinds that we respond to. And it was as I taught at the School of the Art Institute for a long time. And in the context of that, I began working on organizing some exhibitions at the Roger Brown Study Collection, which was called the 1926 Exhibition Studies Space at the time. And that was a point when Jim and I started experimenting with doing some exhibitions together. Maybe that's a sufficient way to introduce myself.
And I'm Jim Dempsey, and I'm a graduate of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So I went there as a painter and studied a little bit of filmmaking as well. I worked for a long time at the Film Center, which is now the Gene Siskel Film Center, which is part of the School of the Art Institute. And I would see John there often coming to see films, and John would see me coming to see music that he produced in town. So that's how we sort of knew each other. We were, going what we thought, going and seeing great things, having similar tastes and things. And in my Film Center days, I programmed a series of Sun Ra programs. Sun Ra is an American jazz musician. Well, actually, he's not American. He's extraterrestrial from Saturn. But we worked. I invited John to help me work on that program. I didn't know him so well at the time, but it was a series of programs once a week for a month, Sun Ra Sundays. And John came aboard, and we worked on that for over the course of a month and put together a visual exhibition of ephemera in the lobby of the movie theater. We also brought in some live musicians to play unrecorded Sun Ra compositions to fill out the programs, which are mostly films and videos, rare films and videos of Sun Ra. So we just had a blast working together. And when that was over, we just found more things to work on. And we just never really thought this would go into some real business situation, but we just knew that we had a good working relationship and we had fun doing it. So that's initially how the idea of doing this for a living started. At some point, John had the idea of us maybe investigating being private art dealers, or maybe we would find a piece of art, present it to somebody, and and maybe if we were lucky, they would buy it. And we had that notion in mind when we stumbled upon a space that was a huge space. And that was the moment. And we agreed to rent this space probably 5 minutes after we saw it. And we also had to change in our mind what we thought we were doing. And we realized we have a space here now that has a gallery potential. We have to start thinking, well, what it could it mean to be a gallerist? So in a way, we were kind of unprepared for that until we started the ball rolling. And at that point, once we committed to the fact that we were doing that, then we had to figure out what we're going to do.
I mean, part of that, I'll just leap in to say, you know, it also came out of, it was also because we were already investigating. I mean, it came out of a series of conversations that we had about the history of art in Chicago and why we, as more or less lifelong Chicagoans, knew so little about our own city's art history. And so we started doing our own research on that and then curating shows that we were looking for spaces to have them.
Yeah.
And finally, we, rather than doing it elsewhere at other spaces, we decided, why don't we just do it ourselves?
Mhm.
And so that really ended up, and we didn't even at all, like Jim said, we didn't really have any preparation for what that would entail. We could imagine it a little bit, but neither of us had a background in business. Neither of us had any background in running a gallery, and neither of us even knew really what that meant.
Yeah, and I mean, I went to art school and I went to a lot of galleries, as you guys probably do. And I would look at the people who would run the gallery and I was sort of like, who are these people exactly? You know, sometimes they would look like bankers and sometimes they would look like artists, and I couldn't figure out exactly how it all worked. And so I think when we started thinking about that, we came from a place of mystery, you know, and so we just sort of thought, well, how would we do things, you know? And so that just opened it up for us to create our own monster in a way.
I think it's a really intuitive process still. We have a team here, you know, that we work with and we rely on to question things that we come up with. We counterbalance one another. One of the good things about working together is that we really have a little yin and yang element of kind of being able to see the flaws in what one another might be thinking, but also trust one another so implicitly that if we feel strongly about something, we'll go with it. So like you end up having a kind of a very well-balanced set of checks and balances where an idea gets developed by being passed around and considered or cut out or amplified or whatever. But there's a kind of a natural way that things happen here. And that has to do with kind of all levels of programming, from exhibition schedule to event programming, to our gallery roster, to, you know, all the way down to like the PR that we're making and all of the kinds of approaches that we have to letting people know what we're doing in the world. All of that is still very much done around a table with us hashing it out. There isn't a specific research methodology beyond something fueled by curiosity and enthusiasm. And I think both of us, that's the coal that keeps us moving forward. Sorry to use coal as a metaphor now is kind of maybe a very ungreen thing to say, but anyway, I'll use it.
It also, early on, we said we would only work with things we love, whether it's people or artwork. You know, we just have to resonate with what we're showing. Otherwise, we can't show it. And we made that agreement early on that it was just sort of like if we can't do something for the wrong reasons. You know, if I'm showing a piece I don't believe in, I can't really talk about it and enthusiastically to somebody. So I have to really love the things that I deal with in order to project that love onto somebody else. So, and if you're doing that, if you're just surrounding yourself with things you love and that are inspiring and people and objects, and it's always fun, it's always interesting, and it's always just a mix of how those things work together. And if you think of a gallery over the scope of a year, for instance, those exhibitions, hopefully they flow together like a good mixtape does. Mixtapes might not make sense to you youngsters, but we used to put songs together on a cassette tape, and we thought about what those songs meant next to each other and how they created a vibe. So sometimes when we're making programming, we think about how do these shows sit next to each other, and how does that rhythm happen? There's the rhythm of the show that you're in the room, and then there's a rhythm of the show before, the show you're in, and the show after. And we think about that too in terms of, what's our accent in the world, or what's our flavor, or what's our attitude? We think about those things, and it's all nuanced, but it's always really fun as well.
Well, I since you guys mentioned like the mission of like this project, like we have this question about how you guys would see Corbett versus Dempsey play the role in Chicago's art community, like in a broader picture, and how do you see it as connected to your mission?
I think that's a hard question to answer with any humility or real perspective, because it's the kind of question that you need to ask somebody else about us. But I think we can say some things about what role we would like to have. And I feel like one of the roles that when we came up, the very beginning of the gallery was really much more steeped in the historical part of looking at the history of Chicago, and we still do that to some extent, but maybe in about 2008 or 9, 4 or 5 years into the gallery, we started to really think we needed to expand what we were doing and start to think about contemporary international program being part of what we were doing. And so we really see the mission, as it were, as being very focused on Chicago, but not focused specifically on Chicago and Chicago artists. That's a portion of it, but on Chicago as a site that produces work that can stay here, can go out into the world, can have a life out in the world that should be of interest and value to people in other places. And then also it's a site where there are things internationally that haven't happened here, but have some resonance with this place that we can be a conduit for. So we can bring artists, for instance, or musicians or ideas that haven't had a venue in Chicago, or a commercial venue, even for ones that might have had a not-for-profit venue. So we've shown a couple of artists, for instance, Christopher Wool and Albert Erlin are two artists who had institutional support here, but had never had commercial gallery shows, or had, in Christopher's case, hadn't had one since 1986. Those are really important artists to the world who have real resonance with Chicago, but didn't have a presence in the marketplace here or in the commercial gallery sphere. And so that's been, for us, part of the real mission has been to try to create a kind of a program that's a mix of things that are coming in and things that are going out, and all of it in one way or another relevant to Chicago.
Yeah. And the idea of we could have one exhibition of somebody that nobody's ever heard of, and one exhibition right after it of somebody that everybody's heard of. That's a fun tension as well. And it also, we wanted to be careful about being the Chicago gallery that showed Chicago work to Chicago people. And somehow when we interject it with things around the world, that tide rises and the Chicago people we work with rise with it. And so then it became really interesting too, and how those energies, or we'd have artists who would want to do a show here and they might think about doing something that's a little bit maybe different than they might do in other cities. They might think to themselves, this is the thing I might do in Chicago because it feels like something I can do in a city like Chicago. And that feels great to us too.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really good. It's really the other part of it is that we're not only generating things that then can go someplace else or whatever. I mean, we've done a lot of programming that if anyone in the United States wanted to see it, they would have had to come here. So we did a Moki Cherry show about 8 months ago that, I mean, there was a Moki and Don Cherry show in New York that preceded it, but other than that, there's no other place that you could have seen, and none of the same work was in the two shows. So we're doing a lot of programming that's unique to us and unique to Chicago. So, and I think that's important because, you know, there's this idea of second city syndrome, where we're seen as a city that's either taking seconds or is somehow, you know, a little less than New York, LA, whatever. We don't at all see it that way. We see Chicago as being a great metropolis that's in a cultural, that's a cultural producer in dynamic dialogue with all sorts of other international venues. And, you know, we're constantly producing things and doing things and working with people in other contexts as well. We've curated a bunch of museum shows in other cities. We've done things in other galleries, with other galleries. We're very collaboratively minded when it comes to other galleries. So we've worked with a great number of galleries in all sorts of different contexts. And, you know, so that expands this idea that's central to the Corbett versus Dempsey notion and mission, but it moves it out into the world too, so that it's not just something that we're doing here by ourselves, hunkered down, you know, like hermetically. We're doing it out in the world, pushing it out into the world. And that's super exciting for us. And it's allowing us also to have a slightly more attenuated publication program. So rather than having a publication program where we have to publish something for every single exhibition we do, we can do something to memorialize it that might be online, or, you know, there's other ways to do that. So, but the pandemic's been as much as anything, I think I wouldn't say that the virtual aspect of it is the most important thing. I think what has been for us most important is that we stopped basically for 2 months. And I mean, there was just nothing happening for a couple of months. And if you'd asked us whether that was viable, I'm not sure we would have said yes. But more than that, we learned that we could not do fairs for a period of time. And fairs are very, very exhausting and taxing. They're important they're an important service that we do for the artists that we work for. They're very expensive, and they're kind of soul sucking in a way, but we do them. But the mythology within our industry is that, you know, a gallery like ours at our scale, at our place in the food chain, couldn't possibly go for a year without doing an art fair.
Yeah.
Well, suddenly you had no art fairs. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, and the art world didn't grind to a halt. It kept going. So it showed that you can have a different relationship to these things and maybe pick and choose what you're going to participate in a whole different way. So it allowed us a much more circumspect relationship to participation in international art fairs. That for me is the most important thing that we walk away from these last 2 years, is realizing that we're in control of that, not them.
Mhm.
You know, I would say for me, and this is because of it was the apex, was the coming together of all of these different things. When we moved into this new space, which was in the end of 2018, we opened our new space here in 2019 in February. When we did a Christopher Wool show here, and we had musical events, and we had brought together all sorts of friends of ours from all over the world. That might be the most exciting moment. You know, we've been fortunate to do a lot of things that we really wanted to do, and, you know, pinch ourselves.
Yeah, and we
that we
figured
can do
out
them.
ways to do them and had spaces to do them, but this is the first time we ever walked into a blank canvas, and we just made the painting exactly like we wanted it. This is this gallery, and every choice was considered, and we thought to ourselves, we have to anticipate anything right now, because we need to build that in so that there's never a time when we'd be like, oh, you know, we should have had this thing do this, or and another friend of ours, artist friend of ours, said, if you're building out a space, never trust the blueprints. You got to go into the space, wherever the lines are on the blueprints, go into the space, have a big piece of cardboard as the wall, and stand there. Does that feel right? And on the blueprint, it might look right. Oh, this looks perfect. And then be like, let's bring the cardboard in there. Doesn't feel right. What if we put it here? That feels right. Okay, let's erase the blueprint, change it to that. We need to really figure out physical space, and to not assume that the architect has figured that out for us. So that was a great learning experience for us too. And since we've opened, there has not been a time when we thought we should have done this. Feels like everything we did has worked for us nicely, and we haven't wanted to change anything. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, 3.5 years in, or 3 years into it, it feels like like all of those choices were made for the right reasons. So
yeah. I think the thing about is try to be as fearless as you can, because there's, once you really start doing it, you realize you didn't need to be intimidated, because you're generally working with people who want the same goal as you do, and so you're just working towards a common theme. And it's also a very intimate space. You work with folks and you get intimate with them, and they can afterwards feel often like your family. And this is, the art world is a place where sometimes those boundaries can be a little bit blurry, and for better and sometimes for worse. But generally, if you can really bond with somebody and you're doing something and you're walking the tightrope with them and there's no net, and you get to the other side, that is very thrilling. And you needed each other to survive that, and you weren't afraid. And, the main thing is just don't be afraid of anything.
I think one thing I would say, and this is slightly based on experience that we've had recently with an exhibition that we did in a museum context, is not to sit still for kind of there's a homogenizing effect that some new institutional models have on exhibition making. Exhibition making should be a creative activity. It should not be a cookie cutter activity, and it should not be an activity that is undertaken in order to please an audience. You should not be going out trying to figure out what an audience wants and give it to them. If you're doing that, you should go into entertainment. You should be making Hollywood movies or something in the entertainment industry. That's not what we're doing. We're not entertaining people. We hope that what we do is entertaining, but that's different. But there's a thing where right now there's a kind of a push within certain models of institutional exhibition making to create templates, to create feedback mechanisms that will ask audiences, what do you want to see? I think the worst version of this is these immersive shows that we're seeing right now pop up all over the place. The Van Gogh immersive, the Frida Kahlo immersive. That's all about this kind of cookie cutter attitude toward exhibition making, which says, oh, let's figure out what people want and then give them lots of it. And our attitude is, let's figure out what the work tells us to do and then do that. And that would be my main advice to young, curatorially minded people: be stick to your guns. And like Jim said, don't believe that other people in those institutional contexts know everything better than you do. You probably know well enough to do things well.
Corbett versus Dempsey's website and program content are linked down below in the description. Thanks, John and Jim, coming today, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We will see you in the next episode.